Have you ever come across the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich in your travels? Some of you, yes. Sometimes they do actually help because they fill in the gaps. And some interesting gaps are filled with regard to this particular moment in history, because it is history. These did actually come, and she was shown how they were given in this strange star something which was not just a question of astrology or stargazing. There was a genuine vision, and this came and went, and when it came to the final stages it was quite brilliant, as indeed it says in the Gospel, and they knew where they were going. When they reached the spot, which of course was shown to them in a supernatural way, they offered their own worship, and she goes into some detail about what she saw, and it corresponds to the Gospel. But she also saw what eyes would not see, and this is why I bring it to this moment of prayer, because it's something which concerns us. One senses immediately when one comes into an assembly that there is a buzz of powerful prayer in the room. This is your case, and therefore the Lord has a blessing for each of us this night, on one condition, that we are present to the appointment. Now, she saw these three wise men offering an incomplete worship, but it was very pleasing. The King of Glory accepted it, and in so doing, he was embracing all mankind in its nebulous uncertainty. He is on side, as we would say. Right now, in the clouds of glory, he is seeing all that is prayer, worship, interiority, attempt in general to get there, on the part of millions and millions and millions of souls. He is also seeing something else. He is seeing the fullness that many have, but the absence of authenticity. And that is the point I want to just attack this night. Authenticity. Have you travelled to other countries and seen how it is done? I propose that next time you have an occasion to go somewhere, look carefully and compare. I remember when I was 17, my parents sent me to study and live indeed in France for a while, and of course one then gets into what is there. And this was going back to 1971, and I was very, very surprised to see the difference between the quality of an ordinary Sunday celebration in France with that of the equivalent even actually in Britain. The care. One would not find a single celebration on a Sunday or Saturday evening lasting less than an hour and not fully sung, and without homily going on for a quarter of an hour to 20 minutes, carefully prepared and chiselled. And although I was puzzled by some things which were far more, in inverted commas, progressive than what we were used to in Britain, I was nevertheless fulminated by the fact that this willingness to go further than the minimum was something to be taken on board. And so I was attracted by France. Indeed, it was one evening, Saturday evening actually, at Rouen, that I happened to wander into a church which changed everything. Why? Because of one sermon. How many sermons would you go into now that would change your whole life? And if not, why not? The sermon started something like this. Accompany me, my brethren, down the road take the N2 and turn off at such a point and go down and reach La Trappe. He had just been on retreat to La Trappe, a big monastery of Trappists, and he just preached on it for a quarter of an hour to 20 minutes. And at the age of 17, a word can go a long way. Now, when it came then to entering La Trappe, I remember that that same puzzlement hit me. They were far more, in inverted commas, progressive than anything I had known, but boy, were they buzzing. It was no huge difference between, if you like, the written and the unwritten. They would go into mode. For instance, in all the offices, Eucharist and non-Eucharist, there was an element of spontaneity. Why am I saying this? Not a single word was said and not meant. That was something which hit me, and I wanted it. Come back to Ireland. What does one find? Do you remember, some of you who are of a certain age, when you were young, that there was in the liturgy a certain mystique? Now that held the structure together to a large extent, because it was something which was received and did not have to be invented. What happened? In some countries which had been pushing for renewal way before the Council, the optic of changing things was often perceived and therefore used. In other countries, the result was not quite the same. It was something like this. The changes were done, but without the raison d'être being applied. The result was this. One pulled forward the altar, one changed the language, but then what? One carried on as before, e.g., the speed. Is it not true? Now what is happening there? The speed was always there, but it was hidden. I can tell you that the speed was something else before the changes. It's just that no one heard it. It was pretty fast, the celebration of the sacred mysteries in Latin. So what happened? The instinct to go quickly came through, and we had more of the same thing. And it's still there, big time. Now, why am I saying this? It can be our case as well, that we think we are praying when we are getting from one point to another on the page. Now God, looking down, sees exactly what's going on. He sees the proportion of prayer within the prayer. He sees what is going on in people's heads. Proof. Have you noticed the proportion of people who actually walk out of church before the last hymn? What has happened there? Have they encountered the living God, or have they done their duty? Now I'm getting closer to the bone. The opening of the doors, the giving of choices and possibilities, the taking away of obligations and structure was a huge risk, and to work presumed one thing: maturity. Did we have that maturity when it came to applying things? Now, closer to us, we have had in the last 20 years or so changes which had not actually been foreseen initially. Do you know that in the early stages of the council, it had not been foreseen to change really at all the canon, so ancient and so sacred, the Eucharistic prayer. Also, do you know that the Council Fathers themselves had not actually envisaged the use of the vernacular in the canon? Now, bit by bit, those came in fairly quickly actually, but it didn't stop there. Other things which also had not even been imagined came in, and they came from strange sources. Sources which precisely are linked with this other element, maturity or its lack. If we are in authentic worship in spirit and in truth, we will automatically perceive the importance of certain things. Not just things like speed, respect and order, but also things which touch directly the sacred. People initially, and I remember actually we were discussing it when it was starting to be just vaguely mentioned by the bishop, the question of appointing and, in inverted commas, conferring the accolade on people who were not heading for the diaconate. It was an initial stage which was very puzzling to us. And I remember we young people were discussing it. It was not pleasing initially to us, young though we were, because it meant that henceforth the body of the Lord could be touched by unconsecrated hands. This was still way before the question of lay people then receiving it in the hands themselves, but the question of helping the priest, something which initially came in mission countries, with the catechists. Now, what I'm about to say may concern some of you directly, and therefore I've got to tread carefully. But just be aware that the Council Fathers had not dreamt of a situation similar to what we have now on parish level everywhere. It's something which came in stages, and some very violently and out of disobedience. Just recently I was reading something which I was not aware of. It was in the late 80s, 1988 actually, that there was, it would seem, a clear teaching and lesson given from the highest authority in the Vatican through the various papal nuncios of the world to get through to the bishops on one specific point. It was the abuse of what was conceded for very specific urgent situations, that the non-ordained should help the priest. It was being picked up that very quickly there were people who were presuming that that step was just a normal step, and it was leading to something which was nothing less than a vandalization and a banalization of the most sacred treasure of the Church. Something which, and I warn you, is not just of human origin. We know from exorcism that the one who hates the God of gods and his body on earth, Satan, has been pushing. And the attack on the sacred is not just of human origin. So I just throw that out to you, lest you be not aware. We're up against it, my friends, and it's not just human pressure. Therefore, what has happened? The Holy Spirit has placed this on the hearts of many people like yourselves to make reparation. And we have seen in these last 20 years in Ireland the lighting of new beacons of reparation. You know what I mean. Every church in Ireland practically has that going on at some stage. Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. That is how God is getting back his rights. So he's placing it on your heart, and he's asking as a mendicant for the courtesy of making that reparation. It's a very simple way. It does not demand much incense or chant. It just demands time. But if it's to work for you and for him, it has to be what? Authentic. Therefore, don't miss the appointment. Don't fidget for your holy hour. Look at him and let him look at you in the depth of your being. If that is happening, you will have freedom to speak to your heart and to be your interior master. If at the end of your hour you have done nothing but say your prayers, you have missed the point. You've had more of the same thing. Adoration means gazing, loving, and for once abdicating.